And good morning. We are live on YouTube and Twitter, but we want to be live on Facebook as well. So we're going to bring in Atlanta Falcons fans on All Falcons and Scott Kennedy Sports. And this isn't just a Falcons podcast. We're going to talk all kinds of stuff this morning around the NFL. And welcome in, everybody. My name is Scott Kennedy. I'm in Atlanta. This is my co-host over here on this side over here. That's Nick Kendell. He's in Seattle. So we are coast to coast with your football coverage. One of the things we want to get into today is potential rookies of the year. And I say rookies because there's an offensive rookie of the year and a defensive rookie of the year. And some of the odds of betting have started to come out on who has the best odds of winning those. We want to get into that and then maybe talk about some dark horses as well. But first, let's say hello. Nick, how are you doing, my friend?
I am doing pretty darn well. I'm counting down the days until Memorial Day. That's when a lot of fun kicks off for me. I got a good buddy coming out, and we're going to spend some time in the Olympics and then some time in Oregon as well. And haven't spent enough time outdoors over the last few weeks, few months. So I'm looking for all that to come together and to get through. But overall, I'm doing pretty darn well and just excited to talk to you all today.
You're freezing up on me just a little bit.
Okay, hopefully it's better now.
So maybe that was me because I was opening up some new tabs and everything. But we'll do a little quick edit before we do the audio version of this podcast. But yeah, good time to be outside. Heat's going to break this weekend, so nice weekend for some baseball down here in the South, and should be in the 70s. Nice day. And speaking of nice days, we want to say hello to some of our friends in the show. Michael Ranquillo is here. Says good morning, Nick and Scott, on the Falcons podcast. Says good morning, Michael. Roderick Cook coming in. He says, good afternoon. Saturday with a cake and coffee. Let the good times roll. Absolutely. Or you just sat down with a cake and coffee. That's not a bad way to go either. Zach Powers. And Roderick, where are you exactly in the UK? I didn't think you were London based. I thought you were a little farther north. You'll have to remind me. Zach Powers says, good morning. He's toasting us with the coffee. Good morning to you as well, Zach. And talking a little bit about, Roderick says that, Bryce Young may be great, but he'd make me nervous if he was ours. And Roderick's a Falcons fan. And I think there's reason to be nervous for any of the quarterbacks that were taken in the first round, Nick. Those first three, I don't see a no doubter. There's questions around all of them, which made it, this draft one of the more interesting drafts coming in, and some big trades for non-quarterbacks as well. And we'll get into all that. And Anthony Evans, he already got his vote. He says Bijan Robinson for Rookie of the Year. And Chris Walker says, good morning, everyone. A lot of moves yesterday. Been busy. It's been busy. We've got them wrapped up on allfalcons.com. Falcons sign a former New York Yankees outfielder. I'm like, wait a minute. Wasn't that Deion Sanders? And Roderick's in Somerset. So where is Somerset? If they don't have a Premier League team, I don't know England well enough. And Kevin Fitzpatrick says, good morning, all. Good morning to you. And Roderick, I've been south. I took a train down to Brighton for a match from London, but that's really the only place in England I've been is London, and then that train down. So but I try and keep a decent map, Newcastle, Liverpool, Manchester, keep an eye on where all those are. But I don't know where Somerset is. Kevin Patrick says, good morning, all. Good morning to you as well, Kevin. Appreciate you being here. Southwest Coast. Okay, there we go. So you're close. You're like right next door. So, going in, we kind of figured there was a top two, Nick, for Offensive Rookie of the Year based on opportunity, talent, system, that type of thing. That's a big one. It's not always who's going to be the best player long-term is the Rookie of the Year, but it doesn't hurt. It just depends most on who's going to have the opportunity to shine. And we went off of pointsbet.com, and I'll put the link in the chat so everybody knows what we're talking about real quick. And they've got their odds for their number one offensive rookie of the year is Atlanta Falcons Bijan Robinson. He is plus 250, which means if you lay down $100, you would win $250 if he wins. So it's basically 2.5 to 1. You think old school odds. What do you think about Bijan Robinson's chances and their placing him as the betting favorite for Offensive Rookie of the Year?
I think that he would be my number one. as well, given we talked about it already, the situation and the system that he's in. I mean, this offense is going to run through him. He is going to be the straw that stirs the drink hell. He's going to be the drink out there in Atlanta this year. So I'm guessing there's going to be ample opportunities for him to contribute. And it's not just, the rushing game also, but I think the passing game is going to be a big part of Bijan Robinson as well, given we've talked about the lack of depth in the wide receiver room in Atlanta overall. So I think Bijan being that favorite, you're not going to get incredible, payout if he does win that one. The juice, because he is a favorite. It's not like a dark horse where you bet that and you get big return. But I think that him being number one makes all the sense in the world. And the top two, I agree with completely. But if it was all even and I had to just pick one, it would be Bijan Robinson. The offense is set up for the running game, and hopefully it'll be a good season for him. But he'd be my number one.
Big Low Country Sports popping in. Good to see you, my friend. We haven't talked in a while, so it's good to see you back in the chat. Bijan Robinson, I just kind of thought I like the idea. I think he should be one of the favorites for all the reasons you just mentioned. And when we start talking about the Atlanta Falcons' lack of wide receivers, you got to take that away and just start thinking of what are the pass receiving options. Mm-hmm. And Bijan Robinson is going to be one of those top guys. He could be one of those Sean Payton types. When Alvin Kamara was with the New Orleans Saints with Sean Payton, he had like 4 straight 80 reception seasons. That's a ton. That's a ton of catches and puts so much pressure on the defense when you're swinging the ball out and getting him in space. And he's going to be so good at that. And then you got Tyler Algier to just hammer it up the middle. So pass catching options, I think that might be the thing that puts him really as the favorite according to PointsBet. My favorite, I still right now would just go, it's hard for me if there's a quarterback out there that's going to be starting right away and should be competent. It's just such a quarterback driven league. And it's quarterback biased in the media. We talked about this 2 years ago, Nick. So my favorite would still be Bryce Young, who came in at plus 450 for the Carolina Panthers. You've got a former quarterback as coach, should help ease him in. Not that he needs eased in. He's kind of a football savant. He's just, the big question around him is he's small. Mm-hmm. But if he can get around that, I think he should be fine. We talked about it 2 years ago, Nick, with Mac Jones. When Mac Jones is, he's a leader for rookie of the year. I'm like, you guys are out of your minds. This quarterback stuff is completely out of hand. Jamar Chase is a top 5 wide receiver. And Mac Jones is doing well for a rookie.
Yeah, top 20.
Yeah, he's like 50. Well, that's really good for a rookie. I don't care. I don't care that it's good. Jamar Chase is good, period. We're talking he should be all pro, but not going to win rookie of the year. Come on. So knowing that bias, Nick, it's hard for me to not pick a good quarterback. And I do believe that Bryce Young is a good quarterback. I think him and CJ Stroud probably have the best chances to come in and play early. With Anthony Richardson shouldn't take him too long to get eased in. But your top 5, Nick, Bijan Robinson at plus 250, Bryce Young at plus 450, Jahmyr Gibbs at plus 600 comes in number 3.
Yeah, overall, I think that they did a pretty darn good job with how they ranked these guys. Like I said earlier, there's a clear and cut top 2 for me, and if it was all even, I'd take Bijan Robinson, but because I get better odds with Bryce Young comparatively with Bijan at plus 275 and Bryce Young at plus 450, I'd probably put my money on Bryce Young just because you're going to have better return on investment if you do win. I think it's pretty darn close to 50-50 between those two, and the odds are not 50-50. So and just between those two guys. But yeah, overall, I mean, it's pretty interesting to see CJ Stroud then coming in 3rd, Jahmyr Gibbs, same odds, and then Anthony Richardson, and then a big jump to pretty much all the first round wide receivers in this last draft class. So out of those next few guys, honestly, I might end up taking Anthony Richardson. I know that Roger, who's it in here that hates Anthony Richardson? Roger Koch. I can't remember gosh, I cannot recall who it was, but Anthony Richardson is going to score a lot of rushing touchdowns this season, and he's going to be in a system where he's going to put up stats. I mean, they don't have incredible wide receivers out there, so it's going to be the similar system.
I think the Colts receivers are a little underrated. I do.
After Michael
because
Pittman,
of what happened last year, but Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, they've got a couple high picks. I think their receivers are better than they get credit for. Anyway,
yeah.
continue.
Well, Yeah, we'll see. Alec Pierce didn't show me enough last year. I did like him coming out of Cincinnati, but I digress. Yeah, I think the offensive system there and the opportunity for the rushing game, especially with Jonathan Taylor in the backfield as well, kind of forgotten about him, although running backs, when they go, they kind of fall off a cliff, and he had a lot of carries at Wisconsin, so maybe that's already come. But I think Anthony, out of the next three on that list, if I was going to pick one, it would probably be Richardson, just because I think the opportunity for statistical output is going to be quite high in a system that I believe is going to be really tailored around what he does well.
Yeah, if he drops 2,000 yards passing and 800 rushing with 12 touchdowns on the ground, he could have numbers as a running back that could end up being comparable to some of the running backs that are out there. I took a long time ago, I took Michael Vick, before people really understood fantasy. I'm like, well, he can't, his throwing numbers aren't good. I'm like, he rushes for 1,000 yards. I don't care. He's a top 5 running back in fantasy numbers. And when you're talking about rookies of the year and these things, you're looking at stats. That's why linemen never win them. You are looking at stats and make it easier to put those up.
It's Kevin that doesn't like it.
I think Anthony Richardson will have a lot of opportunities with the RPOs and easy dump offs and stuff to build up numbers. And he's a monster running the ball. I mean, 6'4", 250 pounds, running 4.4. RPOs with Jonathan Taylor, if that offensive line can be what they were supposed to be last year, Colts offense could be really good.
Yeah, so out of those next ones, again, like I was saying, it's a statistical output position a lot of times, and especially if it's the flashy quarterback. And teams are going to be looking to fall in love with some of these young rookie quarterbacks. I mean, the NFL media is going to be looking to fall in love with some of these young rookie quarterbacks as well. So I would probably put Richardson first, just because the baseline of the athleticism, I think, is going to be big for him. And I don't trust the infrastructure enough around CJ Stroud to take him in this situation. I mean, I know John Mechie's going to be back. Brandon Cooks is still there, but is he there? I like the offensive line, but I don't know if I trust fully the system, coaching staff there just yet. And then you have Jahmyr Gibbs. Excited about Gibbs, but I don't think he is going to be enough of an output player. I think it's going to be the Bijan Robinson show. He's in a better situation. He's in one where there's going to be much more, target share, volume share for the offensive output, unless there's an injury, which, God, knock on wood, but I think that I wouldn't even put Gibbs in the same conversation as Bijan for this Rookie of the Year odds.
And it's close is the thing, so is that one you short with Gibbs as the number 3? I think he might get a chance. So I'm kind of with Anthony on this. He says with Swift gone, Gibbs is going to get a lot of carries. And I'm with him on that. I think he's going to get a lot of opportunity to be the number 1 guy coming in. When you start talking about Bijan Robinson, it is his ability to receive that I think will set him apart, because they've got a 1,000-yard rusher returning who's good, in Tyler Algier. But I think they ran the ball, God, I want to say 600 times, but I think it's 500 times last year. There's plenty of carries to go around. It might have been 600. I'll have to check out. There's plenty of carries to go around, and the Falcons should have more offensive plays this year. They should have, less 3-and-outs, unless you think they're more explosive and some of their 14-play drives end up 7-play drives. But I think they should, at worst, be a similar amount of total plays. Let me look that up here real quick. But I just think I agree with you on CJ Stroud. I think Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, potato for me. Who's the better quarterback? It's close. I'm not going to argue with you. I think Bryce Young's in a better situation.
Yeah, and Zach is correct here. That was Cooks was traded to the Cowboys, so even wipe him off the Houston Texans depth chart there for CJ Stroud. But Scott, I was curious if you had any deep sleepers. Some people that the odds would be so long that you'd be like, I'll sprinkle a little money here, and if it hits, I'm gonna get a huge return.
Well, what's interesting is you mentioned you like the odds on Bryce Young. You like him on Bijan over you would put your money on Bryce Young because the odds are better. Mm-hmm. If you put $100 on Bijan Robinson or Bryce Young, you'd win money if either one of them won it, because it would be plus 250. So you'd be 200 down. If Bijan win it, you'd win $50. If Bryce Young win it, you'd win $250. So it's like, why choose? Yeah. Why choose? Keith Brugman asks, this is a good question. If Hendon Hooker gets his chance early, does he have a chance for Offensive Rookie of the Year?
I can't imagine them going to Hendon Hooker early on because they seem to really like Jared Goff out there, and he's still coming off an injury. No, they're saying he's going to be ready, but I think they're going to take it pretty easily with him early on. I guess never say never, but Hendon Hooker doesn't even reach the radar here of these top players. So I guess he's a deep sleeper that we're about to talk about on here, but he didn't even cross my mind as somebody with the opportunity. But injuries happen, things change.
I think that'd be a long shot for him, Keith, just because as Nick was saying, coming off that injury towards the end of last year, it'd be tough. Now, it wasn't a shoulder, it was a knee, but mobility counts and being able to plant and set and all those things with your feet matters. I think that'd be tough for him on that one. As far as the Atlanta Falcons carries last year, yeah, and as Zach said, they said Hooker is a redshirt this year, which I think that makes sense as well. The Falcons had 559 rushing attempts last year. So no wonder I couldn't remember if it was 500 or 600. It was dead smack in the middle of them. Zach Powers gives a good number. Devon Achane on the Dolphins roster is a dark horse. My question for him, super speedy. They're putting together a track team down there in Miami. Will he get the touches? Will he get enough touches in order to beat out someone like Jahmyr Gibbs or Bijan Robinson, who should have 250 touches this year?
Yeah, I probably not, but just with the situation there in Miami, and that was actually going to be the first guy I brought up as far as what the situation looks like out there. But the running back room is not great. Raheem Mostert has not been great for them, more healthy. Jeff Wilson out there. And then you had Devon Achane, who is Miami's first pick this year. So I think with the space he's going to have, I think Miami had some of the lightest boxes in the entire NFL last season because of the Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle effect. So Achane's going to have a pretty good opportunity there from the players he's playing with, and just the situation of the offense. And also Mike McDaniel is one of the better run game minds in football. No offense to Arthur Smith, but Mike McDaniel also should be at least discussed in that situation for what he did as the run game coordinator for a number of years with the 49ers, learning under Mike Shanahan. So Achane is definitely one of the two dark horses I was considering for this conversation here from some of these deep sleepers.
Oh, I tell you one of my favorite guys out there, but I just think being on the same team as Bryce Young and too much uncertainty in the offense, it's Jonathan Mingo. Mm-hmm. Jonathan Mingo's 6'2" and change, 220 pounds, and I think he'll get the opportunity to touch the ball in multiple ways, not just as a wide receiver, but out of the backfield as well, or at least bubble screens. Find ways to get him the ball. That if I'm looking at guys outside of the first round, one of the first names that jumped out to me was a second rounder, but the Carolina Panthers, I think that's too much because if, and Anthony, you're running the show here for me today, man. He says, I like Jonathan Mingo and Jackson Smith and Jigba as a sleeper. I don't call a first round guy a sleeper. I'm having trouble even with a second round guy as a sleeper. But I'm a big fan of Mingo. But the thing is that what Mingo does will also be attached to Bryce Young. So 60 yards and 2 touchdowns to Jonathan Mingo is 60 yards and 2 touchdown passes for Bryce Young. And it's going to go to the quarterback.
Yeah. Yeah, and talking about Jackson Smith and Jigba, we talked about the top 5 guys. Well, Jackson Smith and Jigba comes up 6th, plus 120. Jordan Addison next, and Minnesota Vikings, plus 150. Quentin Johnson, Los Angeles Chargers, plus 2,000. Zay Flowers, Baltimore Ravens, plus 2,000. And then Will Levis, plus 2,500. So there's your top 10 guys, and I wouldn't consider any of those guys to be deep sleepers listed there. But they definitely have a chance. Wide receiver is pretty tough, and this has not been, we've heard the NFL say many times that this is not a very impressive wide receiver draft at the top. So I'm not, and they didn't draft them like they loved this class either. So I'm not putting my money on any of these wide receivers. As far as a next deep sleeper for me, this one's even deeper than the Devon Achane one, but it's somebody that I liked a lot, and I think the situation in the backfield is going to be ideal for him. And the offense.
Roschon Johnson.
It's Roschon Johnson.
Okay, good.
Yep. I just looking at the depth chart here. The Bears have invested heavily in the offensive infrastructure around Justin Fields, and those RPOs, those quarterback keepers, are going to keep linebackers guessing and the defensive line holding for just a second. And the running backs in front of Roschon are okay, but I don't think it's incredible. They signed Donta Foreman this offseason, who was pretty darn good for Carolina short term, but Carolina signed him from running a trucking company that season. So I don't think he's a big time player. They drafted Khalil Herbert, but he was injured last season. So I think Roschon Johnson, just for the super deep sleeper there, for how the Bears offense is set up with the offensive line, the running game, how they can manipulate teams opposing defensive fronts is going to be a deep one. And Anthony Evans has another really good one with Deuce Vaughn. I'm not a believer in massive outliers, and Deuce Vaughn is a massive outlier. But with Zeke out there right now, and you have, Tony Pollard coming off of injury, there might be an opportunity for Deuce to do some stuff and prove some people wrong. So that's another really good call out.
So Eric coming in. Good morning, Eric. Hope you are doing well. And Eric has not one I would call a sleeper, but if I'm picking a wide receiver and I'm looking at opportunity and all of those type of things that you need to put up numbers, Zay Flowers for the Baltimore Ravens, he's fourth on the wide receivers. For the wide receivers, it goes Jackson Smith and Jigba. Then a pretty good drop-off to Jordan Addison, another pretty good drop-off to Quentin, and then he's tied with Quentin Johnson, Zay Flowers is. Zay Flowers, they're not exactly loaded with wide receivers up in Baltimore. They signed an aging Odell Beckham Jr., but Zay Flowers could be a guy that gets a lot of targets from the wide receiver position.
It's certainly possible. They have another first-round pick at wide receiver who they're waiting on that was injured last season. Bateman, I think, from Minnesota, who's had some good flashes out there as well. I'm a fan of Lamar Jackson, but I don't think it's going to be a high-volume drop-back pass game where there's enough targets to really be a mass, unless he's hitting home runs, that Demaryius Thomas, Calvin Johnson, deep threat, which he could be. But out of the running backs you listed there, the one that stands out to me is Jordan Addison. I mean, he's a route running aficionado, and he has Justin Jefferson off of him. He's going to see single coverage all day. Safeties are going to be shifted over to Addison. And I think Kevin O'Connell can do a great job of matching guys up out there. And I think that Kirk Cousins, while not a great quarterback, is a good distributor and can really, pad some wide receiver stats, as we've seen with Justin Jefferson. So I know we weren't super impressed with Addison's overall athletic profile, but dude gets open. Dude's a good route runner. He's smart in zone. And as a number 2 wide receiver with a little inside-outside ability, I think that he's the wide receiver I'd be betting on out of this group of the ones that we've listed here.
Well, it'll be interesting. See, I think with those running offenses, I grew up when Paul Johnson was running. I grew up professionally because I was already old. Bill Curry was the coach at Georgia Tech. So in my recent past, Paul Johnson brought the wishbone and option offense to Georgia Tech from Navy, I think. He was at Georgia Southern too. Anyway, doesn't matter. Their number 1 receiver, Demaryius Thomas, was one of those guys. They'd throw for 2,000 yards a season. Their number 1 receiver would have 1,800 yards. So if you were the number 1 guy, why would you go there? Well, look how they used their 1 wide receiver. DT was one of those guys. And I think he had a 1,500-yard receiving type of year. So even though Lamar Jackson might not throw for 5,000 yards, he's going to throw for 3,000, 3,500. And Zay Flowers, I think, could get a good chunk of those. I think that's a good shout. I'll be very interested to see how that one plays out. Zay could be a beneficial of a bunch of targets there, a higher percentage of targets, even if not, which will help make up for the lack of volume of passing plays from Baltimore. Coming in is Gary Palmer. Says, good morning, Scott and Nick. We appreciate you supporting the show, Gary. Coming in with a super chat on YouTube and breaking the ice. Any questions? Obviously, let us know. Offensive line. I don't care where they were drafted unless it was Orlando Pace, a number 1 overall type of guy. Is there any chance? You get Broderick Jones and the Pittsburgh Steelers hype train. I think if you're an offensive lineman, you got to be on one of those glamour franchises to have a chance. The Steelers count. I think one of them went to Arizona. Sorry, nobody's going to give you a rookie of the year as a lineman in Arizona. It's just not going to happen. No offense, any more than it's going to happen to Atlanta. It's just the way it is. It's got to be Steelers, Cowboys, Packers, Patriots. One of the glamour teams. Is there any chance at all that one of these guys comes in and gets rookie of the year?
Not a chance in hell. Unless they switch positions and play quarterback and there's some rookie of the year level crazy stuff happening. There's no way.
I'm with you on that one. And I was thinking no matter how high they're drafted, I would consider an offensive lineman I'm trying to think if there's even one listed here.
They'd have to come in with such pomp and circumstance in the draft process as well to already be like, this guy's a god. And then he comes out and plays like a god out there.
You've got to have that built up and there isn't there, who are some of those? That's why I mentioned Orlando Pace. Orlando Pace as a lineman went to the Heisman ceremony. And that's the last time I can remember something like that. It's probably happened since, but that's the last one I remember that had that type of Q rating coming into the NFL.
Hoopla. Absolutely. It's not happening. Tristan Wirfs was arguably one of the best 3 offensive linemen in football with his rookie season, one of the top 3 offensive tackles, and he wasn't even on the radar. So, I mean, it's not happening.
Pay the guys. Just make sure he gets paid.
And yeah, that's,
and that's, we talk about that every once in a while about, what difference does it make? If he gets 50 million or if he gets 55 million? Well, it's a respect thing, and the offensive linemen are completely disrespected, but they get paid, they feel more respect.
Also, you tell me I can give you 0 or 5 million. What's the difference? Like, it counts. It all adds up.
Yeah, it does. It does. Philip Hogginson coming in says, good morning. Good morning to you, Philip. Hope you are doing as well. Keith says, late as usual. Good morning, y'all. Well, we're glad you're here, Keith. Glad you're here. Let me see here. We can move on towards the defensive side of the ball too, Nick.
That sounds great to me.
One of the tight ends. If you had to pick one of the tight ends, where would you go? Because I think there's a possibility. Was it Dalton Kincaid with Buffalo, maybe?
Yeah, that would be the only one that I would bet on just because he is such a receiving threat out there, and he's pretty refined for his receiving prowess. Still going to have some questions about the blocking long term, but can't believe I didn't think of him. That's a great shout. He should be a dark horse as well, not making the top 10, but I think he's just as likely to end up the number 1 receiver out of this draft class, year 1 at least, as anybody. I mean, the opportunity is out there, what they're looking to do to add those weapons. I do wonder if Dawson Knox takes away some of that target share, some of that pie for him, where those targets are going to be distributed in that type of role in the offense. But Kincaid is a great call out. I can't believe I overthought it.
You're mad.
Well,
I am. And again, I mentioned to win those things, you either have to have crazy numbers or good numbers on a team that's getting a lot of attention. The Buffalo Bills are media darlings right now. They get talked about as, top 4 teams in the NFL, which probably makes them top 4 in the AFC. So they're going to get that attention that he should be in the national spotlight most of the year, which will help his case. Plus, he's got a good quarterback, and they're going to put up numbers, and he can get his share. I think that was someone that when I was looking at that, because again, when you're looking at the names, you're not just looking at the talent, you're looking at the opportunity, you're looking at the team they're with and how that makes sense. I'm like, okay, tight end here. Tight end, Josh Allen, Buffalo Bills. Yeah, I can see that. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, that's a great call out.
Chris Walker says Andrews being a major target could make Flowers have a surprisingly good season. OBJ, Andrews, and Flowers with the running game Baltimore has is starting to look kind of dangerous, isn't it? That could be an offense that gives defenses fits. If they stay healthy, Monken might be able to unlock that potential. So a lot of hemming and hawing in the offseason about Baltimore, but they're pretty much right where we expected them to be come June, Nick.
Yeah, and again, I would not count out Rashad Bateman just yet out of those names because he was a first-round pick for them just 2 drafts ago or 3 drafts ago. So he's one that talented player and might be a part of that as well. Curious to see what happens in that running back room this season. I know J.K. Dobbins still another year off of that serious injury where he tore 3 ligaments in his knee, but when you have Lamar Jackson, it's kind of like what we talked about with, Justin Fields. You have a chance to not be the best running back in the world to have great opportunities. So that'll be a fun one. And Keith Brugman also says the dark horse is Jalen Hyatt. I just find it pretty hard for the wide receivers in this year's class, and Scott mentioned it pretty well also that when Jamar Chase doesn't win it against Mac Jones, and Jamar Chase arguably had the best rookie wide receiver season in NFL history.
He's like 1,500 yards as a rookie. Yeah. I mean, he was like top 3 or 4.
And he was the 5th overall pick. He was the 5th overall pick. And the storyline with him and Joe Burrow, I guess, did Joe Burrow maybe take away from Jamar Chase because it's about Joe Burrow instead of Chase? I don't know, but
I firmly believe it was the New England Patriots, the glamour team. It's the Patriots versus Bengals. It's quarterback versus wide receiver. Yeah. I'm not going to go any deeper than that. That's deep enough.
You and I got pretty mad on here about that. Just scratching my heads. Yeah, what the hell is going on? That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, I was.
Anybody that started talking about Mac Jones as being one of the leaders, not being being the leader for Rookie of the Year, I took issue with.
Yeah.
Now, this becomes an interesting question for Falcons fans. The number 2 Defensive Player of the Year rookie odds on PointsBet.com is Jalen Carter. How would you feel about the Bijan? Let's say Bijan Robinson is offensive rookie of the year, but Jalen Carter is defensive rookie of the year. This is a fairly level-headed group in here, but we see how Twitter reacts. And what do you think the general feeling would be like? My opinion, there will be some people that complain about everything. So there will be a vocal minority that says we should have taken this guy, premium position, all that type of stuff. I'm of the opinion if you get good players, so be it. And if Bijan Robinson wins Rookie of the Year, then you're happy with the pick, no matter what Jalen Carter does. Number one on that list at pretty good odds, Nick, is Will Anderson, Defensive Rookie of the Year at plus 350.
They have the wrong team listed.
Double that down to Jalen Carter at plus 550.
I'm a little irritated with NBC, this article, because they have the Arizona Cardinals listed next to Will Anderson there, but he was they traded that pick to Houston, so it should be the Houston Texans on there. But yeah, he should be number one going away. No question about that for me. So that's a good one. After that, though, it's pretty tough, and I'm pretty curious to see all these defensive backs listed here. I know it was a really good defensive back class, and we've had a trend over the last 5-6 years where defensive backs have started to win Rookie of the Year. But before that, I went back like 30 years, and there was no defensive backs that won these awards, really.
It's got to be guys that get sacks.
Yeah, sacks or tackles. They still love tackles out there for the votings. If there's a rookie that can, gathers 150 tackles, you're like, oh my God, look at this guy. He's incredible. So there's a lot of, especially in the 2000s to 2010s, a lot of that stack middle linebacker position winning. Granted, you had guys like Patrick Willis, Levante David, Luke Kuechly.
Back when the linebacker position was still cool.
Yeah. So I think right now it is a defensive line oriented position, and they need to be able to get sacks, and they need to have been a premium position, premium draft pick most of the time as well. So Will Anderson seems like an obvious one for me, even though Houston isn't great talent around him right now. He's been so impactful in a number of ways that he does stand out for me. After that, though, I mean, it's pretty hard for me. Tyree Wilson, he was not really a giant sack getter at Texas Tech. You're betting on the traits there. It might take a little bit of time for him to really start to stand out. How often I really love him playing opposite of Max Crosby, but I don't love the defensive tackle room there in Vegas. The cornerback room is maybe the worst in the entire NFL. So what the opportunity looks like there, just looking at this room right now, I mean, Christian Gonzalez being out there in New England's done a really good job with their cornerbacks. He might have an opportunity to do some stuff out there. And then maybe this is me being biased, but if it is a statistical based position, Jack Campbell just gathering 10,000 sacks, and how much conversation was around Jack Campbell when he was drafted, and then pushing the narrative like, oh, you guys all made fun of us that he was picked, 18 overall, and now he has 150 tackles on the year and our defense has turned around. I could see some real, narrative being pushed out of Detroit and the NFL at large about the Lions overdrafting Campbell if he comes out and just has an unbelievable statistical season. So those are ones that stand out to me.
Roderick Cook says, glad we missed on that potential disaster. Carter is in the best place for him and the Atlanta Falcons. I'm a little surprised to see Jalen Carter second overall, to be honest with you. Even just for position, just because of where he plays on the interior defensive line, it's harder to rack up numbers. He could do a great job doing his job, but not stand out, on a spreadsheet somewhere, not have all of those flash plays. So I would short that one, so if it was, you'd have to bet $550 to win 100. That's odd, but I would go that way. I would still go with the edges. I'd move Carter down simply just because of the positions for trying to win Defensive Rookie of the Year. Same thing we just talked about the offensive linemen. Are offensive linemen not important? No, of course. They're going to be hugely important for this team. They're just not going to win the awards. I would move up. I would move Carter probably, honestly, down behind Van Ness. Which is, instead of 2, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Van Ness is 6th. I'd move him down behind there. I think 8 sacks from a rookie edge is going to play a lot more than doing a really good job on the interior defensive line. Yeah.
Unless you are, putting up outlier type of statistics. The other thing about, and I saw maybe Zach Powers, another good call out about Nolan Smith. The Eagles defensive line is so deep that you're going to, we saw it last year with Hassan Reddick, didn't really stop him down from getting stats, but there's going to be such a rotational of players that what does the opportunity look like overall? You're going to be fresh and you're going to be put in a good situation when you're out there, but you're not going to get a high volume of plays to make a difference out there comparatively.
One of those guys that finishes the season with 18 tackles and 8 sacks.
Yep.
But those 8 sacks count for sure.
Yeah.
Let me see here. And Anthony, I think, kind of agrees a little bit with me. Says, I know Will Anderson's number 1. I think he wins Defensive Rookie of the Year. Dude is a beast. Tyree Wilson, number 2 for me, with a wingspan and good motor health is something to watch for in there. I like Lucas Van Ness. I do. And then, as Nick mentioned, with the recent trending towards, hey, cornerbacks playing really well early is not easy. That I think it would be one of those corners before we see Jalen Carter. I think Jalen Carter's odds are a little high. I would short that one. Eric comes in. He says, Bulldog fans will forever be upset about not taking Jalen Carter. We will never hear the end of it if he gets Defensive Rookie of the Year. And Eric, when I read this, the first thing that I thought of was, then they're not Falcons fans. You know, they're Bulldog fans. And that's fine. I've got nothing wrong with that. I think of it this way. I'm a Chelsea fan, Chelsea Football Club. I've poured my fandom, my pros, my professionalism is NFL, college sports, is American football. So my fandom has had to find other outlets. And when Christian Pulisic goes to Chelsea, I'm rooting hard for him, but not at the expense of Chelsea. I was a Chelsea fan before Christian Pulisic was there. So, yeah, I'm an American and I'm a fan of the American, but I still want my team to do well, regardless of what Christian Pulisic is doing. If he does well, that's just a bonus. If I'm going to not like a team anymore because of how they're drafting or not drafting, then I wasn't a fan to begin with. So those are Georgia Bulldog fans. Those aren't Atlanta Falcons fans. A smart marketer would try and bring them into the fold a little better than they have. So, but those are first and foremost Bulldogs fans. And if I was a better marketer, I might say, hey, listen, if you like these guys equally, why don't we take the Georgia kid? You know, we've only got 2 million Georgia Bulldog fans within 2 hours of our stadium. How about we throw them a bone? No pun intended, Nick.
Yeah, that's a good call. The commenter is right though about the Georgia fans being upset about not taking Jalen Carter, but you know, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you draft good football players, and Atlanta's good. Wouldn't care if they came from, you know, Wisconsin or Whitewater if you're drafting good players. Robbie Red come in and say nobody talking about Devon Witherspoon. That's a good shout as well. Again, it has been recent trend where cornerbacks are now starting to get a little bit of praise on that. Before it was a defensive line and linebacker award because those stats are easier to count. When it comes to the cornerback room, they need to have the stats. It can't just be they're holding other wide receivers to low yardage. No, they have to have plays on the ball. They have to have tackles. They have to have, of course, interceptions. So Witherspoon definitely has a chance. I'm curious to see what that defense looks like with him and Tariq Woolen opposite each other. I still have questions about the spine of that Seattle defensive tackle, linebacker, safety, but Devon Witherspoon and Tariq Woolen have a chance to be arguably the best cornerback duo in football over these next few seasons. So that'll be a fun one to watch out. The one just circling around here, though, talking about the stats, Emmanuel Forbes, number 1 all-time leader in college football in pick sixes. They drafted him early because he had all the plays on the ball. Washington has a really damn good defensive infrastructure. That defensive line is deep and talented, and Forbes is going to make plays on the football. So I'm curious if he's got a chance. Again, pick sixes, the all-time leader in college football, all-time in pick sixes. I mean, you got to at least consider Forbes in that one.
So we were talking indirectly about Devin Witherspoon, Robbie. When I mentioned Jalen Carter, I would move him down. That was the only one I really took issue with as far as this order. On this list, we put it in the chat at the very beginning. Devin Witherspoon would then move to 3. So I didn't call him out on that, but if the order on PointsBet for odds is Will Anderson, Jalen Carter, Tyree Wilson, Devin Witherspoon, Christian Gonzalez, Lucas Van Ness, I would honestly drop Carter down, which would move Devin Witherspoon up to 3. If he's 3rd, I think there are a lot of people talking about him, and he's someone to keep an eye on. We just didn't mention him by name. That's a good shout to bring him out. So thank you. Ade as a sleeper pick. Whew, talk about a deep sleeper, but I think the rookie who led the league in sacks last year was the undrafted free agent from Jackson State.
For Detroit.
Yeah, I think so. And he's friend of a friend, so I spoke with him before the draft and I was going to help him do some PR. And then 12 weeks into the season, I'm sorting rookie sack numbers. I was like, holy cow, there he is. So Ade went down to the 4th, didn't he? Maybe even the 5th.
4th.
He couldn't have gone past the 4th. Up to the Indianapolis Colts. He should get some playing time. They're going to play him inside. They've said they're going to drop him in as a defensive tackle.
Yeah.
And then put big guys around him and let him use his quickness. Who are we talking about that seems very similar in that 4th, 5th round?Maybe a little short, super quick, tenacious. Remind you of anybody, Falcons fans?
Grady. But Grady played one technique and nose tackle for Clemson. So it was a little bit easier of a transition, in my opinion. I get what you're saying, but I remember watching Grady like, this is a small nose tackle, but he's kicking everybody's ass. Yeah. Where Ade, you're moving him from edge to inside, which is a different game.
Yeah, he was used to being inside, where Ade is different. But as far as using, like I said, find a way to use his, if he's a tweener, find a way to use his pluses as his pluses.
Yeah.
Use him as the strength, which his strength is his quickness. And then, put 2 jumbos on the other side of him, or have, your big package behind him, a big inside linebacker. Let him be quick. Let him be a disruptor and not say, okay, you have to take on. Your job, Ade, is I want you to knife into the backfield. I don't want you to try and take on 2 blockers right now. I want you to disrupt, and we'll flow around you, around that disruption.
And just to talk about that just a little bit, Ade, this one just came to me just now. I can't believe we never talked about this one. But the transition, even though the athleticism and the size looks good, it's not always easy because it's a different game inside. And number 3 overall pick, I think it was 6 years ago now, was somebody who played on the edge and because of the body type had to transition inside and ends up being a gigantic bust. Solomon Thomas had that smaller body type. He tested like a freak out there, but just a little bit more compact and didn't really was able to play both ways. So that's one where it's not always easy still, and fell the 4th round. I can't believe we never talked about Solomon Thomas for that transition. That makes a lot of sense as far as pumping the brakes. And
a lot of times those guys are outside because they're soft.
Yeah.
If they're big like that and you're playing them at edge, it's because they couldn't. It's like, okay, well, you've got the body type of a defensive tackle. The difference I think here with Ade was he was a little undersized, so they kept him outside. Not necessarily that he wasn't thought of as big enough to play inside, as opposed to, all right, we put him inside and he's getting his ass kicked, but he is quick enough that we can have him do a job on the outside. It makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Demaryius Thomas, may he rest in peace. He played cornerback in high school. He was a monster. He was 6'4", 215 pounds at a single A, double A high school. So he was the biggest guy on the field, one of them. And he played corner. You know why? Because in high school, he was soft. They got that out of him, and he turned into, hey, DT, you're the biggest, baddest guy out here. Be the biggest, baddest guy out here. But that can sometimes happen with a guy like Solomon Thomas. There's a reason why he didn't stick inside. It's because, and that's just me spitballing on that. So Keith with another shout. I'll go with Joey Porter Jr. for Defensive Rookie of the Year.
Maybe. He just had so few plays on the football that I have a hard time with it. But he does have the pedigree in the name that if he has a good season, teams are going to be excited. People are going to be excited to vote for him. And the team.
Yep. And the team. Again, the Steelers are one of those teams that they're going to get plenty of attention. And Keith, at plus 2,600, drop a 10 spot on it. It's worth it. It'll pay you over $2 for that one. It's plus 2,600. And Chris is kind of following up what I said. Falcons fans who are also Bulldogs fans are frustrated that Falcons hardly ever picking Bulldogs. And I get it. I know. I wrote it up. I think you saw, Chris, at just how poor they had been at taking guys that are close. You don't have to take one every year or build your whole team around it. What the Philadelphia Eagles have done is a little, it's an outlier. That doesn't happen very often. But one of those guys, you're passing on Hines Ward for some guy down in Miami, I think, that was meh. I mean, it goes way, way, way back. I know. And like I said, a better marketing person should do a better job of integrating the huge fan base in this state into the Atlanta Falcons fan base. I get it for sure. Marlon, welcome in, Marlon. Appreciate you being here. He says, would Carter be a good fit in Atlanta as a question? That was a question. I think it was a risk. There was obviously a risk there. Not knowing all of the information, Jalen Carter would have been my pick. Based on the talent, what we know publicly, and that he was available in the position, I would have taken him there at 8, just because it's for all the reasons I just mentioned. We don't know all of the stuff that went on behind. If I'm the Atlanta Falcons, I'm probably dropping about $500,000 in private investigators before every draft. I'm dropping, Bijan just signed his $22 million contract. Putting $500,000 into private investigators is chump change. It's a good investment. And whatever they dig up and they decide, hey, listen, this is too big of a risk for where our team is right now, Bijan Robinson was the safest pick in this draft. No doubt in my mind.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I mean, running back still, the injury probability is pretty high. That one, you have a short time period. It's the surest thing to get early impact, but it's also the one with, if you don't hit, it hurts the most because
it's
just getting
the safest. Like I said, but he was about as sure thing as being a good, productive player as you were going to find in this draft. I believe that.
I agree. I think I'm just viewing the risk with a slightly different perspective than you, because if you're taking a running back top 8, if he doesn't end up a perennial all-pro conversation, it was a miss. Where if you take an edge rusher and he just ends up being a B+ level edge rusher, that's okay there, given the impact and the quality and opportunity.
But if he ends up Jamal Anderson, who was, I think, a number 8 pick, then, and then you're throwing him out there because he was your number 8 pick and he stinks.
Yep.
There's risk everywhere. Everybody's got a risk. And as far as what player is going to produce for you, who's going to be the safest pick I could make to produce for my football team, I think Bijan Robinson was a safe A pick as you could find out there. So we're going to hop out of here in just a couple minutes. Want to hit on the chat real quick. And Ryan Adonis coming in. Appreciate you coming in, Ryan. Good to see you. He says, everyone has to understand if you're going to spend millions on a player and that player doesn't care about football or has drug problems or off the field problems, it's a huge risk. Again, they used to call it in college team rules. This player suspended for the game. Undisclosed team rules violation. Yeah, drug test. That's what they all were. That never happened with Jalen. And I don't know. Like I said, I don't know Jalen Carter enough to know how big of a risk he actually is. I know what the reward is. I know what the ceiling is, but I don't know what the risk was. And the Falcons, I don't think, are in a position where they could take a big risk with their number 8 pick. They need to hit on this one. And like I said, I think they went with the safest one. Aki asks, does Bijan have as neat a dance as Jamal Anderson did? I won't be surprised if he does a dirty bird at least once. If he does the old dirty bird at least once before his Falcons time is all said and done.
Wouldn't be shocked at all. But wrapping it on up here, Scott, I think that overall, if I was betting on these odds that we have right now, I'd put money on Bryce Young, giving you a little plus return. If I could only bet one, I'd bet Bryce Young because I have him and Bijan neck and neck and get better odds with Bryce. And then I would put on Will Anderson. I just think there's not really somebody that I trust with the statistical output from this crop of players that it's going to be as much of as high of a floor as Will Anderson. So I don't know if there's any. Oh, and dark horses on the defensive side of the ball. Mentioned it earlier. It's one that stats matter, and I think linebackers matter as well. The Broncos, if for some reason an injury happens and Drew Sanders gets a chance to start, I could see him racking up an unbelievable amount of stats and tackles, and could be one that's a super dark horse. Now, again, this is just me being a Bronco fan I'm this close to that situation, so that's one reason why. But a lot of people thought he could be linebacker 1, and he's been apparently was just unbelievable in rookie minicamp. If he gets a chance, I could see him accumulating a lot of tackles, and that gets some buzz.
And cranking that hype machine early counts. And if Russell Wilson and Sean Payton start winning some games, the Denver Broncos will be in the national spotlight.
Yep.
Smart Ride comes in. He says, passing up on UGA players goes back farther than this. Our scouting department needs to be revamped. Smart Ride has been revamped. That said, I agree with you. I think I just mentioned a guy who played in 96 when I was talking about it. If you go back and look at who the Falcons, when they passed on Hines Ward, they took a receiver. I think Akeem Dent is like the only Bulldogs player that they've ever taken above like the 4th round ever.
That's
I had to
weird.
go back. I put the numbers up and I was like, oh my God, I really, I couldn't believe it. I could not believe how much they had ignored, passed over Georgia players in the history of this franchise. I was shocked. A Georgia player, I was pissed when they took Keith Brooking over to KO Spikes. And then the national media starts saying, oh yeah, they're really throwing a bone to the local fans there, taking local boy Keith Brooking. I'm like, are you joking? There's no Georgia Tech football fans in Atlanta. There's more Auburn fans here. Takeo Spikes, who played high school football in Georgia, would have been a better pick. So I'm with you on this one.
And just real quick, talking about hometown teams not drafting hometown players, I think so. It must be an NFC South thing, because I think I read that Clemson has never won, or excuse me, Carolina Panthers have never once taken a Clemson player, which is just crazy.
The thing is because of the lack of good NFL football in the South for 100 years, the de facto sidewalk fan teams have been college teams. Mm-hmm. It's been Alabama Crimson Tide, the Georgia Bulldogs, Tennessee Volunteers. The Falcons didn't start playing down here until the late 60s. And then they were a joke of a franchise until really Arthur Blank took over. Had a spurt here and there, but one winning season in the 80s. So, and then with the influx of, people that moved to Atlanta as a transient town, it was a college football. Your NFL team was your college team. You weren't a Packers fan. You were a fan of Alabama Crimson Tide. You weren't a New York Giants fan. You were Tennessee Vols. And that's just the way it is. So when you pass over those guys, it stands out more than it does in other areas of the country where, even the Cleveland Browns, if you talk Ohio State or Cincinnati Bengals, Columbus is right in between Cleveland and Cincinnati. Those are the Browns and the Bengals. Now Ohio State's huge, but those are Browns and Bengals fans. There's much more tradition there. You're not going to a Falcons game, with 4 generations of Kennedys until recently. So you were doing that with the Georgia Bulldogs. I promise you that.
Yeah.
On that note, we are going to get out of here. Appreciate everybody for checking in. Hit a like on your way out if you don't mind. Do us a big favor. And if you have any questions or anything, leave them in the comments afterwards. We're always sure to check them. Nick and I will be back on Monday.
Tomorrow. We'll be on.
Yeah, but
Broncos.
We'll be back on this channel on Monday. And then once we hit June, we're probably going to move the schedule around just a little bit. We will be back Monday at 9 a.m. on these channels. And we'll be back tomorrow on Mile High Huddle at 9:30 a.m. Central. So appreciate you for joining us. And like I said, any questions or anything, hit us up in the comments afterwards. And Nick, any final words and we'll say goodbye.
No final words. Just been enjoying the off season. Obviously, things are going to start to slow down a little bit in the summer, and my schedule is definitely going to be a lot more erratic as I hit up the national parks that I'm rocking today on my hat. A bunch of different spots out there, but excited for the summer, and we'll still have plenty to talk about. And if you guys have anything that you're dying to talk about as well, something you think is pertinent to Falcons, Broncos, NFL at large, hit us up on Twitter. We'll give you a shout out, obviously, and be like, hey, today we're going to talk about this for 20 minutes, and we can really peel back that onion. That's what's great about these shows is we can communicate with you guys. You're as much of the conversation and prompting us forward as Scott and I pinging off each other. So we appreciate that. It's not, us, you're over here because it's flipped, but it's which way those guys too over on the chat. So appreciate that. Make sure, thank you everybody coming in and contributing today to the conversation. Anthony Evans was big time for us. Roderick Koch, of course, Akey Dragon always with the clever quips. Chris Walker, Kevin Gray, Ryan Adonis, good to see you. Ryan, Michael Ronquillo, of course, Zach Powers, always with the great comments too. So you guys are
Gary
great.
Palmer, thank you for the super chat.
And Gary, the guy, thank you so much, Gary. You're all killer. If I didn't name you, I think we still definitely appreciate you coming in and hanging out and chatting with us today.
All right, y'all. Appreciate you being here. We'll see you Monday, unless we see you tomorrow over on Mile High Huddle. Have a great week, everybody.